I certainly did while I was in withdrawal, but I proved myself wrong with implementing a neural retraining program. The brain is ever changing. We can be chemically injured, and our experiences can also cause damage. But the brain can repair and it can functionally adapt. The way to heal it is to provide conscious direction that supports that healing. That's what neural retraining programs do. The knowledge is only part of the equation. Turning that knowledge into action is where that healing happens. Brain retraining balances the nervous system. With POTS, the body is likely stuck in sympathetic overdrive. For me, healing POTS was a combination of cultivating calm so that I could balance out my nervous system and repattern triggers and associations so that they no longer had the power to activate my sympathetic nervous system. And incrementally training was another means of repatterning and building resilience. Early on in my journey, I was on a beta blocker to regulate my heart rate, and when I started brain retraining, I was still on it, but as I built up skills in self-regulating, I was able to wean off of it successfully without a reemergence of symptoms. This was something that I had tried previously to brain retraining, but I was unsuccessful in getting off the medication without the recurrence of symptoms. Exercise was not a priority for me in the beginning because I was mainly bedbound. I trained on being upright first, then moving more around the house and moving to the outdoors when I felt more comfortable. It was an incremental approach focused not on pressure of accomplishing what ideally I should be doing, but allowing myself to grow into that direction of that goal and in a way that was supportive of my body and my nervous system with gradual changes. As for sweating, so that whole system was deeply affected by these issues. My temperature regulation was majorly dysregulated. I was sweating and getting hot flashes, and I'm in my 30s, so that shouldn't really be happening. Whenever I was in a room that would be actually cold, I was still sweating. And the thing about the sweat that I learned, though, is that it smells different when you're in sympathetic overdrive. It's not a normal sweat like I know now when I do physical activity and my body is using it as a means of regulation. When it's dysregulated sweat, it smells like onions. At least mine did, and onions were not even part of my diet because I was intolerant to them and before I rewired. Yes, this was a complex problem for me because the dysregulation of my nervous system caused excess cortisol for me. And I was screened for Cushing syndrome multiple times over the course of 2 decades because doctors couldn't figure out what was going on with my adrenal glands. This presented visibly as weight gain, and the truth was that I was barely eating anything, so I was frustrated because my body wasn't matching my diet intake. And the outward assumption when you're overweight is that you are overeating. So exercise was something that was continually suggested, but it was something that I honestly didn't have the energy for. And I didn't feel good when I did it because I was approaching it by how other people exercise and not what would be supportive for my body. Boot camps and cardio workouts weren't fun for me and it felt unsupportive. Like there was too much pressure and too much hype, too much activity. I needed to cultivate calm. I needed to be gentle with myself and my body. It was already going through so much. So instead, I shifted to stop thinking about exercise and I focused on the idea of joyful movement. This meant doing things I actually liked or wanted to do with purpose that would be motivating for me to do them. So I did work in my garden, and my accountability buddies for joyful movement came up with the term garden work for cardio health. I went on regular walks out in nature. I bought a hula hoop because I remembered the joy of them as a child and they were good for fitness. And I started a regular yoga practice that I continue to keep up with now. My first year of rewiring wasn't focused on exercise, but I built up for it. I also had a stationary bicycle that I would ride inside while watching YouTube videos of scenes where riders had a GoPro on the helmets, so it helped me feel like I was out of the house and traveling somewhere beautiful on a bike. And for any roadblocks, it's with like physical activity or exercise, I think it's an opportunity to get creative with them. So that's what I did. I used creativity to make it more fun. Okay, if your goal is to do things outside, the first step is to identify where are you in the process right now. What is within your level of comfort to do? Is it sitting upright by the window and still getting the benefit of seeing and hearing the outdoors? Or is it moving a chair outside and sitting outside for an extended amount of time? You could feel the sunshine and hear the birds and feel the breeze, maybe smell an earthiness to the air. That's still doing things outside. And maybe you do that as a daily or weekly routine. And if you wanted to take it a step further, you can stand up and walk a few steps and go back to sitting if you prefer. It's all about meeting yourself wherever comfort is at and then branching out from that place so you can build up to what your goal is. It can be too drastic or too much pressure to do a 180 from comfort or to push towards the ideal without pacing for resilience to build. If you're holding yourself to external standards or beliefs of what you feel you need to be doing or should be doing, and it's not genuinely something that you want to do, that's another thing that brain retraining can also help unpack. Yes, I did. I was exhausted, as if I just completed a triathlon with no training or preparation. And the reality was that I simply went from my bedroom to the bathroom or the kitchen, and I had barely any energy to carry out normal basic tasks that kept me alive. Training for me focused on probably two or three things mainly. One would be cultivating calm so that I could regulate and my parasympathetic nervous system was able to get back online. Two, incrementally training so I could move forward into my goals. And three, patience and grace. It's not a quick process and it can be made slower and harder by that internal pressure or frustration of holding yourself to perfectionist standards. Self-compassion is such a huge part of the success of rewiring. First, I want to say congratulations on your pregnancy. I personally am not an expert in this area, so I can't speak much for pregnancy. But it sounds like you are caring for yourself and your baby well and doing some of the most important things: movement, nutrition, and rest. That's great because I am not pregnant and it took me a long time to prioritize and balance those things. Your body is growing a person, and with that comes hormones and a lot of chemical processes that are not entirely anything you can control. Your power is in your thoughts, so if you feel your brain is mush, maybe something that could help in that moment is to acknowledge how amazing your body is right now to be doing all the things it's doing. It's creating life, and this experience will eventually move to the next stage. So it's not a permanent state for yourself where it will always feel the way it may feel right now. Sometimes just knowing that change will come and that it's not something you need to actively pursue can be the answer. I think there's this habit of doing, but there's also power in pause and rest. Maybe self-compassion is enough. Maybe that compassion can create a chemical shift within that can also help regulate any dysregulation from hormonal changes. I realize that this is a simple answer, but sometimes simple works. I am really liking this topic of energy this week. So, for this question, there are a few things that I want to discuss here. I think the biggest thing would be to look at objectives and whether they are realistic or perfectionistic. We are human, not machines. I had this tendency to overload myself with various things and set out to do them in an unrealistic time frame, working up adrenaline the whole time so that I could power through, and then at the end of the day I would be exhausted and so frustrated with myself for not getting everything done, even if I had accomplished a lot. I'd completely overlook what I did accomplish and focus only on what I still needed to do, and then the cycle repeated. That may be the reason why someone is running out of energy, because the objectives or standards are not attainable. Another reason is a core belief on productivity and that rest isn't okay, but we need rest. Our body needs rest. Rest is just as important as energy because rest can be what restores energy. So being mindful of rest cues is an important aspect of energy use. When I run out of energy, I take a break. Even if it's 5 minutes or 15, that alone can be enough to recollect and shift the chemistry and go back to what I was doing. I'm starting to implement the Pomodoro method, where rest becomes more of a conscious part of my process of doing so that I can be more intentional with my energy and allow for rest to be more integrated. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all answer here, but those are things that I would consider, and maybe some of the other answers in this video will also give more insight. So I found the sensations that happen with POTS to prompt emotional reactions from me whenever I would notice them. I felt afraid that something bad was happening in my body and like I was in danger. And that's a normal response the first time you feel the sensations and you don't know what they are. And what may be the typical course of action then is to go to a doctor and they do their testing. And that's the process that I went through. And that sense of danger was alleviated because the sensations were identified and it was not a life-threatening condition. But I still had the fear because I was imprinted from the first time. So I kept having that fear any time that I felt the sensations because I didn't have a means of undoing them. So the cycle repeated. And I needed to focus on reframing the sensation and being more at peace or accepting of them so that I didn't introduce more stress hormones from stress or worry in noticing them. When I focused on gifting myself calm, whenever I would notice the sensations, my parasympathetic nervous system was able to be active. And that's what was doing the healing to restore and balance out the body and regulate the heart and the other organ systems. It becomes a team effort. My conscious focus was no longer on the symptoms, but on managing my thoughts and feelings. And the body was then provided the ecosystem to alleviate the symptoms without my stress adding to the process or disrupting to the process. Well, having a goal in mind or a motivating factor can be a driving force for pushing through those moments. If it feels like it's too far of a stretch to get to that goal, I think it's important to meet yourself wherever you are at in the process. What is one thing that can be done to move forward in that direction? It doesn't have to be a leap. A step towards the goal is still a step forward, and it's still worth celebrating and doing. One thing that's not easily illustrated by the rewiring journey, because it can be so non-linear, is that as you stick with it, as you keep going and overcoming challenges, moving through experiences that were difficult, things do get easier. You gain a momentum within yourself that empowers you with tools to support yourself in the direction of where it is you want to go. Your resilience and ability to adapt and change grows. It helps to have a system that is measured or incremental so you can regulate more balance in that process of growing. First of all, congratulations that symptoms are resolving and that you are increasing your walking. That's wonderful news, and I'm so happy for you. It sounds like you have a system in place where you are actively training. And I don't know the specifics of your situation, but I do believe that brain retraining can assist in advancing mobility, especially when used with incremental training that is rooted in joy or some sort of motivating factor. What does full mobility mean to you? What does it feel like? What does it look like? If you can sink into those feelings, I believe that that can help drive more forward motion and facilitate changes with neuroplasticity. Any doubt or limiting beliefs can and should also be addressed in the process of rewiring. I don't think this is something I've mentioned on my page much yet, but have you explored laughter yoga? When I was at the beginning of my journey, those symptoms were the heaviest for me, and my prefrontal cortex was less accessible in those moments. And mirror neurons can be a huge benefit in those cases where it becomes more of a subconscious effort. Laughter yoga is a practice where you are intentionally laughing with others for the benefit of the neurochemicals that get produced while we laugh. And it's magnified because you are doing it in the company of others and picking up on their facial cues. So that generates more chemistry more consistently. There are YouTube videos that explain and show laughter yoga examples, but the more effective method of participating I've found is to engage in Zoom calls with laughter yoga buddies where it's more live and you can interact with each other. Even if just watching along is rewarding because you're still getting some of the benefit, but you get more of the benefit if you're actually participating. Because even if you're not genuinely laughing, just the muscle reflex of laughter prompts those neurochemicals which are restorative to the body, and they help counter any effects of stress. And the restorative chemicals that I'm talking about are serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin. And I will do another post specifically about laughter yoga because I think it's really an asset to a brain retraining practice. What you just described sounds very similar to how I was in 2018, and I so remember that feeling. If you're on this page, then you're aware of brain retraining, which is a great start. And if you don't already have a coach you're working with, I would encourage that for added support and encouragement, because then it alleviates some of the frustration or uncertainty about what direction to head. Another thing that can be helpful is to think of the long-term goals you have for yourself. You may be bedbound now, and some people may be content with that, but it sounds like you have a different outlook for yourself. I would develop that if it isn't already. What would you like to do if physical limitations were not a barrier in the way? It's okay to think about these things because I feel that they are a source of power that can re-empower us to move towards that direction. Thinking about them may also give insight into limiting beliefs that are also present, and that's something that brain retraining can directly address. As for the symptoms, I hope some of the information I've said in other answers resonates here as well. I believe there's a path from those symptoms to whatever goals you also carry. It doesn't look exactly the same for everyone, but the basics are essentially the same. An incremental approach that guides from point A to point B. That's where it can be particularly helpful to have a coach because it can be less of a zigzag to get there. So one thing about me, if it's not already clear, is I like to take a creative approach. I personally do not agree with more rigid methods of brain retraining because what drives people to such programs is a need for regulation. And if the method is a source of stress, it's counterproductive, and the method needs to be adjusted to meet you closer to comfort so that you can grow more efficiently. If you are not yet in a position where you could feel supported in staying upright or standing, that's an arbitrary standard that may be more of a stressor than a restorer. What brings you comfort? What brings you feelings of safety or support? That can be a means of self-regulation and restorative neurochemicals. I would meet yourself wherever you are, and when you are experiencing intense symptoms, offer yourself that experience, whatever it may be. And for any thoughts that need repatterning in the process, that's something still within your power to change because of the fundamental principle of neuroplasticity. What if you didn't have to stop it? What if you acknowledged that feeling as valid? What could you offer yourself in knowing that you are tired, but also that it doesn't have to serve as a barrier? It can be a message. It may simply be a message from stress chemistry. Excess stress chemistry can deplete our energy. The feeling is real, and usually the message is requesting rest. But rest can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't need to be sleep. It could mean a change in activity, so instead of something stressful or draining, the activity switches into something that brings joy or comfort. Restorative chemistry like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins can enliven us with more vibrant energy and feelings. They can repair the physical and chemical effects of stress. Maybe the feeling of I'm tired becomes a signal to engage in more opportunities for restorative chemistry that are more conscious and intentional. I think this is something that everybody has a challenge with because I don't think anyone really has it all figured out, even if they've recovered from chronic health issues or maybe never had them. And I will admit it and say that I personally am not perfect with this. I don't get the symptoms anymore, which is nice, but I'm still learning what my body can do and when I need to step more consciously into rest. It's a balancing act, and sometimes the range changes, especially if you're doing something new or learning something new. There's a learning curve, and that can take more energy than when the process is more patterned and automated and the pathways are more established. I think the important thing here is to not fear doing too much. For example, it's springtime here and my yard was in need of some preparation, so I worked on it and I paced myself, and in theory it sounded like a lot I needed to do and maybe beyond my capability because I hadn't dealt with it before, but I approached it in steps and I took time for myself if I needed to, and I got it done. And my muscles were used, and sometimes that can mean temporary discomfort, but then it goes away. And now I have this beautiful yard to look at. So the fear part can be a roadblock or thoughts that something will be too much or damaging. But I think it's those limitations or perceived limitations that are the source of stress or inaction because it's uncertain or unmeasured. Brain retraining allows you to step more fully into the present and ground in the strength of yourself, body and mind. I think that perspective helps the resistance that comes up. The limbic system just wants to keep things safe and comfortable, and comfort is still important to be mindful of as you don't want to completely abandon it. But comfort can grow, it isn't fixed, and we are neuroplastic and adaptable. There are two things that I would consider here without knowing your particular situation, so I don't know what's going to be able to be applied. But number one is that the physical activity may not be the source of the tachycardia. It may be a perceived pattern. I know just going on a different direction, if I ate a certain food, I was convinced that I would have a certain reaction. If not immediate, then delayed. And if it didn't happen immediately, I'd continue to look out for it. I'd think about it, I'd wait for it, and eventually it would come. And the problem there was that I was activating the pathways to that symptom every time I thought about it. Our brains are so powerful that time becomes irrelevant when we think things. I could bring up something from my past and have the same thoughts or emotions come up in the present. So if you have any patterning of certain thoughts after physical activity, that may be a source to rewire and not the physical activity exclusively. Number 2 is that the tachycardia is usually the result of excess stress hormones. So if physical activity is believed to be the issue, I would look for exercise modalities that will provide you more restorative chemistry, such as a yin yoga practice or joyful movement, to see if that makes a difference. So maybe it's not increasing the activity that you're currently doing, but switching to something that will be more supportive or equally supportive that you can build up from there. Well, I don't know the specifics of what you are implementing and how you are implementing it, but I can answer the first question. One thing that I believe is needed for brain retraining is access to feelings of safety. If you can source those feelings while in your environment, I believe that's all that matters. I know that my environment or life circumstances were far from perfect while I was in the process of rewiring. However, navigating those experiences with the tools that I was also building allowed me to refine and learn deeply on how to implement the system to create shifts in my perspective. With external circumstances, there's only so much within our control to manage. Our power rests in our associations and beliefs and mindset to create shifts that bring about more peace, even in the midst of the stress. I don't believe that outward circumstances need to change for brain retraining to be a success, as long as safety and grounding can still be accessed. The more you access it through practice, the stronger it will grow. Well, it sounds like you have the awareness that you have those thoughts and that they might be contributing negatively to habits or experiences that you wish to change for yourself. So that's a definite start, and I would say it's half the battle. Not everyone has that conscious awareness, and some people are still stuck in a non-conscious cycle. This kind of thought is part of a fixed mindset. If you've followed my posts on Tuesdays, I've been offering reframes each week on what it is to embody a growth mindset. So in this case, that would recognize that energy replenishes. So in doing an activity, you can also take breaks in order to be mindful to replenish energy, such as the Pomodoro method that I mentioned in another answer in this video. Or you can plan for restoration after or before the activity. The goal isn't exactly to dismiss the thought, but to provide a means of support so that the thought doesn't become a barrier. I hope that this answer helps. I'm happy to address this more specifically in the Flip Your Script image series because it's a thought that I definitely had before as well. Incremental training is very much about the individual, so you can start wherever you are and work up while balancing comfort. It's like the edge that they talk about in yoga. You don't want to plow through it and do something completely out of your range of motion, but just expand to the edge of comfort. Pause and see if you can grow or move beyond that point just slightly. The more you practice, the more that endurance builds up and that flexibility and the muscles are conditioned and able to do more. Another important facet, though, is being mindful of restoration so that more energy doesn't get out of balance. I think when we get too focused on rest or too focused on energy is when problems with dysregulation can present.